deadline. Well, I happened to mouth off to a priest and said, I'd really like to do a small group study about some of the scripture texts that have to do with money. And he said, oh, that'd be great. We could do that during Lent. So I had to write it for him. I call it the Bible study. Anybody can lead, and I would suggest that you never ask a rector or priest in charge or whatever you've got to lead this. Lay people can lead it, and it works really well. You just kind of pass that around. It's pretty user-friendly. I showed it to my friends in the Ecumenical Stewardship Center, and so that's why. And then I just sort of de-episcopalized it for them so they can use it. Last night, someone had asked the question that got into how you develop a money conversation, and I may have mentioned this resource. So for those of you who were here last night, here it is. I'm going to talk about giving in the hierarchy of need, and hold on just a minute because I need to open my book so I don't lose my place. I used to call this thing Maslow Meets Jesus. And somebody thought that was a little too, too cute, I guess. So I now alternatively call it Giving in the Hierarchy of Need. But for those of you who are familiar with Abraham Maslow, or those of you who are not, let me just say about him. Maslow was a psychologist who did some pivotal motivational research back in the 50s. Companies wanted to know how they could motivate us to do things more efficiently and do it their way instead of our own slower, less efficient way. And they had kind of figured out that we might do that if we were given an adequate motivator. What Maslow did was to identify some of those things that motivate us. The truth is, if there's something in it for me that I value, I'll do it your way. If there's nothing in it for me that I really that is valuable or useful to me, I like my own way better. Thank you very much. And so Maslow identified a series of stages of significant felt needs that we pass through. And he developed this. If you've seen it in a textbook, some of us have ad nauseum. It's usually as a stair step or a ladder. Begins with those with the need for survival, scarcity, moves on to community belonging, and then identity. And his fifth one was a need for meaning. I started work on this my first year, back in 1996, my first year in New York. My predecessor as the stewardship officer who was in the evangelism office came back from a conference and said, what do you know about Maslow's hierarchy of need? And I groaned and said, I've got it in half a dozen textbooks sitting at home someplace. And we spent a lot of time talking about what Maslow's hierarchy can tell us about why we behave the way we do when we come to church, particularly about our giving. Now, when I showed this little chart that I put together, because people found it to kind of help you stay with this, I invite you to scribble all over it. If you want a clean copy, if you'll send me an email, I'll send you one. You will notice it has a copyright notice on the bottom. If you want to reproduce it, ask me. I always give permission, but I'd like to know where it is. And no, you may not post it on your website. Thank you. Because I don't think it's very useful as a chart. I think it really requires some conversation. Anyway, and I don't care that the Diocese of West Texas has it on their website. They didn't ask. And I didn't know they posted it until about a week ago. Okay. Now, when we looked at this the first time, he said, how come you put survival at the top? Because those of you who have seen Maslow's chart know survival is the bottom step, and identity is the one, meaning is the one at the top. Self-actualization, as Maslow called it. I said, well, I do that for a couple of reasons. First of all, when you and I talk about this, we start by talking about survival. And I don't know about you, but when I learned to read, I learned to read from the top of the page to the bottom. The other reason I did it is because when you and I look at a stair step, we kind of have this unconscious tendency to assume that as one ascends the ladder, somehow there's a kind of a virtue that accrues to us, and we're kind of better than those poor schlubs who are still at the bottom. And so I'm working against that hierarchical virtue assumption in which we engage. So there we go. Survival. We enter this life, and that is our first felt need. Best example of how we express that need for survival is a 100 acre. And what every mother knows, because somebody told her, is that when an infant is hungry, it hurts. I mean, there's a physical pain associated with hunger. And there is significant pain associated with an overwhelming need for survival. Now, I need to say I will be using primarily economic terminology here, but survival may not be necessarily economic. It may be spiritual, it may be health, it may be all kinds of things, but I'm going to use the economic terminology because I think we have a better understanding of that language. And I leave you to your own devices to develop the metaphor. But it's concerned with some basic necessity of life. When that is the overwhelming felt need, it will not surprise you to know it's highly unlikely that we will be giving anything to church, that we will pass the offering plate on by. If you're not sure you're going to make it through the grocery store with enough to feed your kids for the next week, the odds of you putting money in an offering plate are slim to none. So that's the giving behavior. What do we need? What is the congregation response? Well, interestingly enough, the first thing we need to do for folks, if this is their overwhelming felt need, is meet the immediate need. People need food, give them food. They need help get a job, get them to some place that can help them get a job. If they need somebody to sit next to them as they sit in the visitors section outside the intensive care unit while someone vital to their life is in jeopardy inside, and they need somebody to sit down and pray with them, sit down, take their hand if it seems appropriate, and pray with them. Meet the immediate need. The truth is, people from whom scarcity is the overwhelming felt need can't hear a lot less. The other thing you do is you teach people to pray. And there are three significant questions that I think the leadership of every congregation should be able to answer. If I gave a quiz to my vestry, this would be question number 1. How do people learn to pray in this congregation? And I mean all the leadership. Collar wearers and plain clothes folks need to be able to answer the question. So let me talk just a minute about learning to pray. We are blessed in this country with two prayer traditions, the extemporaneous and the liturgical. Now this is where I usually fess up to the fact that I am a recovering Southern Baptist. I had an uncle who became a priest in his 50s. Uncle had always said that the Baptist saved you from hell and the Episcopalian saved you from the Baptist. And please understand, I cherish every moment of my Baptist life. But I'm sure there's more than one person who kind of understands that. I grew up in the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, very into about custody and divorce, a moderate Southern Baptist congregation. But when I could do what I wanted, I followed my way. But I grew up in the extemporaneous prayer tradition, which has a number of virtues. When you learn to pray in that tradition, you learn to just make it up as you go along and say whatever is on your heart, as we say. And to know that that prayer is going to be audible and actionable to God. That's its primary virtue. That whatever it is that you say, you direct toward the Almighty will get there. The downside to the extemporaneous prayer tradition is you sometimes just get some really sloppy prayers. You're not sure where they start, and they seem to kind of wander around, 40 years in the wilderness, and you get kind of this, oh, dear Lord Jesus, we just want to, and we just want to, and we just want to, and you're thinking, and I just want to say amen and sit down, thank you very much. So it has a downside. We live in a liturgical prayer tradition, and one of the great gifts that was given to me when I became an Episcopalian was to discover all of the prayers in the prayer book. For people who have thought of things to pray for that I might not think of, I'm not that good, and that certainly prayers in language that is precisely what I hope to say with an eloquence that I probably do not achieve. I think my favorite prayer back in those 800 pages are the prayers for those we love, in which we ask God to do for them things we don't even think to ask for them. That is a profound thing to ask for. So that's the upside to the liturgical prayer tradition. Now the downside is that it can sometimes cause you to believe that only prayers that come from the book and are prayed by the person who is wearing the official prayer costume, tight shirt, collar, robe, whatever, that only those will be audible to God. Well, that's not so. Any prayer you utter, even if it doesn't sound real prayerful, even if it's sometimes a little bit irritated, and even if the language is really awkward, is always not only audible to God, but actual. So how do you teach people to pray? I think we certainly direct them to the wonderful prayers, but we also want people... See, here's why it's important to teach people to pray. Prayer is our communication with God. And we are about the business of helping people cultivate a close relationship with God. I defy you to tell me that you have a relationship in which there is no communication. If you do not feel a sense of competence in your conversations with God, it is harder to come close. I would say impossible. So, I think we teach people to pray some of the same ways that work well with children. Now, I will say that if you set a bunch of children down and you tell them, fold your hands, bow your head, close your eyes, and then ask them to offer a line of prayer, you will get a silent circle of children. Because children have a concept of turn. And if you have your head bowed and your eyes closed, you don't know when it's your turn. So I've observed with children, one of the things that works really well is a little strategy I call squeeze a prayer. Stand them up in a circle, everybody holds hands, and the teacher begins, and they close their eyes and bow their heads and all that stuff if you want to. But the teacher begins usually with a thank you, dear Lord, for this lovely day that we can come together and all these lovely children, and then you lightly squeeze the hand of a child on either the right or the left. Don't blow this and do both of them. You'll be in big trouble. But whichever child's hand you squeeze knows it is now their turn. I find it interesting that we teach children to pray by saying, thank you, God, for whatever. And yet, when I hear prayers of the people in most congregations, I hear, oh God, please. Our prayers of the people are filled almost totally with supplications. Where are the thanksgivings? I'm in a church now where they get to that line about, here you can offer your special thanksgivings, and there's deadly silence. We've got a whole list of things to ask for, so beginning in about 2 weeks, they're going to find a whole list of things to be thankful for. I spent a brief time as the church secretary of the Church of the Resurrection in Jessamine County, Kentucky. People who love and people who don't want anybody's deserving it. And I noticed this phenomenon about prayers and prayer lists. In fact, I kind of asked, I said, the prayer list, I noticed we add names, but we don't take any on. So I figured out if anything happens to me, don't put me on this prayer list, I'll never get off. So it became a game for me to have as many supplications, as many thanksgivings as we have supplications. So I follow that, give thanks to God in every circumstance. So it might be thank you, God, for the beautiful weather we've had, and we all got to have backyard barbecues, and everybody went swimming, and we had a great time. And the next week it would be thank you, God, that it rained all week, we couldn't get out, but the sweet corn is just amazing. I didn't care. Give thanks in every circumstance. And we had as many thanksgivings as supplications. Anyway, so I suggest that something like a squeeze of prayer, and being very attentive to the kinds of prayers that you get going on. Very important. How do people learn to pray in this place? And you're very intentional about it. Okay, there's this thing that I've got here in the second column called time span of vision. Here's what's going on, and this is the period of time over which we can imagine predicting what will happen with a reasonable degree of certainty. And I suggest, now Hugh and I debated this, he thinks if scarcity is your overwhelming felt need, it's 3 days. I think it's a whole week. That's the period of time over which you can imagine what's going to happen and feel pretty safe that you're going to be right. Now, we tend to ask people, as part of our financial commitment program, to make a financial commitment over a period of 12 months. What's the likelihood I can do that? This is what's going on in my life. Impossible. I mean, if I can imagine predicting 7 days and you're asking me 12 months, that's crazy talk. So understand that. The biggest reason why people living in scarcity won't fill out your pledge card has nothing to do with a hard heart. It has a lot to do with an overwhelming sense of scarcity. Under the word survival, I have 20%. That means that in the totally hypothetical, absolutely non-existent, so-called average Episcopal church, this is about how many people are sitting out there in the pew do on any given Sunday morning. About 20% of us can't imagine filling out that card. The relationship I'll say a word about, the relationship column on the far right, relationship is what drives the giving behavior. And for most people living in some kind of sense of survival, their relationship with God, if I were to say, tell me how you experience the presence of God in your life, my answer might sound something like, well, I'm a member of St. Peter's. I don't go very often, don't do very much, or I kind of go to the service and then leave. In other words, stranger may be too strong a word, but I'm vaguely acquainted, and we most often begin answering the question by saying whether we do or do not have a relationship with a congregation. Now keep in mind, none of these are 100%, but usually we will give the answer. It may be as simple as I grew up going to church, but I don't really go much when I was in college. But that's the relationship. Now, when survival becomes predictable, we move on to a sense of a need for safety. And here we just want to feel safe. Now in church that kind of translates as, oh dear Lord, please don't let me do something to embarrass myself and call attention to myself. We can imagine behaving in socially acceptable ways. We begin to give when we come, whether it's loose bills, and we will graduate to a gift to contract, whether it's a check or scrawling our name on an envelope. It generally begins with loose bills, and it's when I come. The reason I do that is because I kind of begin to feel something like a customer. You know, I came, I got a sermon, got communion, coffee wasn't all that great, but I got a cup, and then the sermon was great, okay, so it's pretty good, I would pay something. What do we need at that point in our life? First of all, encouraging regular prayer, but we need invitation to the Lord. And we frequently get that wrong. This relates to the question someone asked last night about the time and talent stuff, because usually what we ask people to do is we ask them to do something. And what we ask them to do has two flaws in it. First of all, the vision span is 3 months. We generally ask them to do something. This year, could you teach the middle school Sunday school class, which I think is an invitation. Pretty good. But we get the time span wrong. And secondly, the other thing we get wrong is what we ask them to do frequently has little to do with the gifts and talents that we have discerned that they bring to the congregation, and a whole lot more to the thankless task we haven't been able to talk anybody else into taking on. So we ask them to do the wrong things. And here's a way to handle that invitation to belonging. It kind of sounds like this. It's me to say, Sarah, you know, I'm teaching the middle school Sunday school class this year. Could you help me for the next 3 weeks? Could you do this with me? And what will happen as we do this together is that she will learn where the class is, what curriculum we use, which parts that we always use, which parts we just pitch out, whether you do our whether we do arts and crafts and projects, and if we do, is there a supply closet where we get this stuff, or am I supposed to stop on the way to church at Walmart, do I get reimbursed for that, or is that just considered my gift for the week for the church? Whatever. We learn what class at time starts and stops, as opposed to what time the 7th grade boys will tell you it starts and stops. In other words, this person will have an opportunity to do it with someone and have a sense of a possibility that they might feel safe doing it. So I might be able to come back next month and say, could you substitute for me? On your own, we've done it together. In other words, come with me. The first time you ask somebody's coming to a church potluck, and you need to say things like, are you coming to the dinner? Could you sit with us? We'd love to have you do that. The first time you walk into one of those doors, it can be really kind of spooky. And you probably need to give them a hint about what to bring. You got to tell the newlyweds that the casserole for 4 is kind of not big enough. And what kinds of things people usually bring to this stuff. Information. One of the scariest things that we do on Sunday morning, I think, happens to be, when somebody stands up in a congregation, especially if they have a clipboard, usually it's a woman, but not necessarily, I just know it's coming. It's we need some more people to sign up for coffee hour. Now folks, an invitation to do your first coffee It's an invitation to commit social suicide in a church. If you get this wrong, you can be socially dead for years. Now, I just need to tell you, I mean, who wants to be the one who has people walking around on Sunday morning saying, who on earth made this coffee? Now, back at Resurrection, I figured out, we had 40 families, the same people did coffee hour. There's all this whining about they're tired, somebody new needs to do this. So I finally wrote an article about how to do coffee hour. First, I answered what I think is one of the great rolling mysteries on Sunday morning, and that is, how many scoops? See, you all know this is an important question. And don't think that you're going to solve this problem by buying pre-measured packets. There are places where that'll make 6 cups and places where it'll make 12. You've got to get this straight. And the second question is light into it, and that is, and which scoop is that? Because all of us who have the Tupperware cup scoop that makes 2 cups need to know that's different from the scoop that measures 1 cup's worth. In my family, we do not allow my sister to make the coffee. She has never figured out which scoop, and we've told her. She makes other things instead. So you have to answer these questions for people so that the invitation around coffee hours, I'm doing coffee hour this week, can you help me? And we reveal all these mysteries, how many scoops and where the scoop is kept, and we tell the truth and kind of figure out what the norms are. The article I wrote from Resurrection said stuff like, you don't really have to bring food, but we will talk about you if you don't. What level of cleanup is required? So if you do this stuff with people, you learn this stuff and begin to feel a sense of confidence. That's the invitation to belonging. It begins with will you come and do something with me? Not will you take on this task that's outside your time span and may or may not be doing. Okay, that's another 20 to 25% of the population. That means that on any given Sunday, among people who are sitting in church meetings, anywhere from 40 to 50% of them cannot imagine filling out a 12-month financial commitment. So there's some grace for that. I always feel sad for people whose goal is to have 100% return of pledge card. Now, if that is your goal, I have for you, I think it's in the Steward's Notebook, it's called the Take the Next Step pledge card. The first item on it is, I don't know when, I don't know how much, but sometime this year I'll try to give you some money. It's a pledge card that is based on Maslow's Hierarchy of Need. And the church for whom I created refused to use it because they said, well, everybody will just check the first box. And I said, I feel so sorry for you that that's what you think of the people. Anyway, okay. Now, I feel safe here. I kind of like it. The people are pretty decent. It's not far to travel. It kind of meets my needs for a church. I'm ready to belong. And fun things happen. Our time span stretches to about a year. We can imagine filling out a pledge card if you're a pledging congregation. We need to belong. And what we most need from the congregation at this point in time is information. This is the time in our lives when the church writes, they do announcements during the worship service, you do a newsletter, you put it in the bulletin, you publish. If you know what's going on, you really belong. If you don't know what's going on, you don't really belong. You're just kind of passing through. So the information is critically important. And it is now time for significant question number 2. An invitation to Bible study, like I said, engaging the gospel. Now, so the question here is, how do we engage the gospel in this congregation? What are the opportunities to engage the gospel? And the 6-minute homily ain't it. Trust me on this. Frequently we do Bible studies, and I have to confess that all too often they are, we ask the learned person who paid all the tuition and bought all the books and has them displayed in the office so we'll all know they have them, to lead the Bible study, and the Bible study kind of follows this format too much of the time. Well, we're going to read from Book Acts. Well, here's kind of a little history on Book Acts. Here's when we thought it was written, and then there's another scholarly view that it was written this other time. But the prevailing view is Acts. And who wrote it? And how many people wrote it? I mean, are there really 3 Isaiahs or not? I don't know. And did Paul really write all those letters? And there's some discussion about who wrote the thing, the authorship, and the prevailing scholarly view, blah, 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 and something about the socio-political and economic context in which the book might have been written, and the context in which they might be talking about, which frequently are not the same, right? And so we have some discussion of that, and then we will finally get around to reading something from book X. And then, perhaps, this learned teacher will take a word or so and say what they mean in the original Greek or Hebrew, and how they have been erroneously translated by the NRSV, or whatever translation we're working on, and how that might be reinterpreted based on alternative translations. Now, I gotta tell you, I'm a real sucker for this. I love every minute of it. And probably eminently capable of spending the time with the textbooks to be guilty of it. But here's the thing. This has kept this entire text in my head. It has not begun to tug at my heart. So I would suggest to you that you look at some things, whether you call it Lectio Divina, gospel-based discipleship, the African Bible study, whatever it is you've got. And there are Bible studies that generally have you read a text 3 times, and after each reading ask a question. You'll find this in the talking about God and money. The technology for that thing is embarrassingly simple. Read it first, and you ask what word, phrase, or idea stood out for you. And nobody gets to do an exegesis at this point. You just say the word that really got your attention when you heard it. You read it again, and you say, what's Jesus saying to us? Good question. Did a little discussion here. It doesn't take too long. And then you read it the 3rd time. And this is the really engaging question. What is Jesus calling you to do? Or what is this text calling you to do? It's the best way I know to start a meeting of any church group, from your vestry down to the altar guild or the stewardship committee or whoever. Because when you begin to ask that question, what is Jesus calling us to do? You are engaging the gospel. How do I do that? What does it matter what Jesus said? So what opportunities do people have to engage the gospel? And I don't care if they're in living rooms or in the corner at the Dairy Queen eating, drinking coffee. Well, actually, Ann Savage would be better than the Dairy Queen. I hardly recommend it. However it is that happens, how does that happen in your congregation? I'm now a member, and I want to do what good members do. And it's very interesting. We begin to develop this concept of dues paid. I want to make sure I pay the right dues, and this is the point in our lives when we are most likely to ask the question, either directly or in a sneaky fashion, but the question is, what do people give around here? We want to know, what's the norm? And people say, well, we can't tell people what to give. Well, there's a 2-syllable agricultural epithet that is my response to that. But my mother would never forgive me for saying it in public. Because here's the deal. I don't care what the Diocese of Chicago has done, but I will tell you that since 1982, I think it was 1982, as a body general convention, I know they do crazy things, but in every general convention except one that I know of, they've passed a resolution that says we affirm the tithe as the minimum standard of giving. So here's the answer to what do people give around here. As Episcopalians, we strive to tithe. And when God has so blessed us, to move as far beyond it as possible. Got that? I don't see you taking notes. You got to write this down. Because if you answer anything else, you just better know God heard of it. You're in big trouble. You know, as Episcopalians, we strive to tithe. It shocks the Baptists to know we can spell the word. We strive to tithe. And when God has so blessed us, to move as far beyond it as possible. There are people who are deeply concerned about poor people who can't afford to tithe. Striving is not an abusive norm. I promise you. Anyone can strive. So that's the answer to the question. And like I said, we can imagine a year we can fill out the budget. Okay, well, I'm a member here, I've been here. And by the way, that's about 25% of folks. In the total hypothetical, absolute non-existent so-called average, I mean, aren't all Episcopalians from Lake Wobegon, where our children are above average? All right. When we've been there a while, we kind of like some identity. We want to be known and kind of acknowledged for what we can do. What we most yearn for at that point in time is a role in decision-making. Our time span stretches to about 3 years. So I would ask you, how long are your vestry terms? Are we not clever to figure out that people will get to a time when they're happy to be elected and to stay far into the night discussing such significant theological theological matters as, do we really need to replace the boiler? But we figured that out. I think that's brilliant. The relationship, patron is the best word I've been able to think of. Kind of a member who's willing to assume some extra responsibility and accountability. Our vision span stretches to fair share. This is a time in our lives when we are most likely to say, well, I can't decide how much to give until I know what the budget is for next year. You must resist this at every turn. Because if all people do is give enough money to meet the budget for next year, you just manage to stay alive. There's no adventure in it. Now, people will look at your stuff and they know what it cost to run the place last year, but we tend to do this kind of voodoo math about fair share. Let me use easy numbers. Well, let's see, the investor says it's going to cost $100,000 to run this place next year. We've got about 100 families. $1,000, that's my fair share. And if you were talking to somebody with a six-figure income, you just left a whole lot of money on the table. That's not how we decide how much to give. We decide how much to give based on what God has given us. And to decide how much to return. And the congregation collectively then decides how to use those accumulated gifts to do the work that God is calling the congregation to do. Now I got to tell you this, let's do the financial commitment program first, and then we will create a budget. It's really hard because you have people who really want to know how much do you need. They'd be very happy if we put up one of the fundraising thermometers for this. So do the best you can. This is the time when what we need is we need opportunities to engage the gospel. I say that because when we're working on community belonging, it's probably our most endearing period because we're very willing to do stuff. Stay after and clean up after the conference. Oh yeah, I'd be happy to do that. Well, you get to identity, and it is probably our most, well, it's not that we're unpleasant. We just have some prickly parts to us at that point in time because we like making decisions and think we ought to be able to get to it. And this is the time in our lives when we are most likely to be either the starter or one who joins the crusade for a really good church life. Now, this is why engaging the gospel is so difficult. I used to say it was impossible, but now I know it's possible. It's difficult, but it is still remotely possible. That you might indeed ask yourself the question, what is Jesus calling you to do? And actually hear Jesus say throughout the church life. I don't think it happens. I think that's a hearing problem. But people who are engaging the gospel regularly and ask themselves the question, what is Jesus calling you to do, are less likely to start a church fight. My friend who insists that every church fight he's ever seen is somebody who did not get the kind of identity and recognition that they thought they deserved. And the vote didn't go their way. But that's right, they took that as an identity. Okay. Now, then what happens can best be described as with the word conversion. Having confessed to being a recovering Southern Baptist, I can tell you that the word conversion causes me no discomfort, but I have been in many parts of the Episcopal Church where people start to look uncomfortable when you say it. So if that's a problem for you, you can cross that out. Feel free to substitute transformation, paradigm shift, willingness to consider another opinion, whatever. But what really happens is people begin to experience the presence of God in their life. And they do that thing that's described in the Old Testament as the turning around, and the world begins to look different. And the questions they're asking themselves change. Now, as I said, this is where Maslow would be talking about self-actualization. You and I divided that into two parts. The first one begins with a quest for meaning. What's my life about? What is it I'm supposed to be doing? We're asking serious spiritual questions, exploring spiritual practices. Well, we might even go out and buy a 2-line slip set of the daily office and start reading the readings suggested for the day to try and figure it out. Because we're really trying to figure out what is my life about. Experimenting with holy habits. I'll talk a little more about holy habits when I talk about the 7 secrets. Vision span is lifetime. What am I going to do with my life? giving, we begin to see ourselves as one of God's partners in earthly work. And so we're giving a percentage. We're working towards the tithe as a percentage. What we need at this point in time, I said education for leading. Some of you are familiar with EFM, the Swanee program called Education for Ministry. It's helped them. It's a small group deal. A couple $100 a year about your tuition, small group discussion, readings, there's some homework, anything like that helps you figure out what's life about. And opportunities to discern ministry. Now it's time for significant question number 3. We've asked, how do we learn to pray? How do we engage the gospel? And now it's time to ask, how do we discern vocation? The best definition that I know of vocation is one that I think came from the widely respected Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann. And it's this: vocation, a purpose for being in the world that is akin to the purposes of God. A purpose for being in the world that is akin to the purposes of God. In other words, we're not asking, what do I want to be when I grow up? We're asking, what is God calling me to be and to do? That's the question. And where are those opportunities? Now, in the Episcopal Church, we tend to think that kind of vocational discernment is the sole province of people who are contemplating a change in haberdashery and job and an expensive education to help them do that. Discernment and vocation is for everyone. You may have a job that sustains the ministry or the work that God calls you to. You may be fortunate enough to be working actually and doing the kind of work God's calling you to do. You may be somebody like Libby. Libby was our diocesan receptionist, 15 years ago. And Libby believed that she was called by God during that period of her life to be the receptionist for the Diocese of Lexington, so that anyone who called on the phone or walked in, her job was to help them experience the fact that Jesus was present in the way she loved them. She had significant health problems, wasn't a lot she could do, but she answered the phone in a most charming way. She was a smile and a pleasant greeting for anybody who walked in, and she felt called to do that. So it doesn't necessarily mean you don't have to quit your job and go to Africa tomorrow. But how do we discern vocation? Extremely important. Okay. And then, that's about 10% of your folks. The last 1 to 5%, Hugh says it's only 3, I think it might be 5, are people who kind of got a handle on what their life's supposed to be about, and their purpose is to live that out and to do that work. The relationship that drives that is family. I do this as a child of God. I work with my Father. I'm doing the work that the Father has called me to do. And they can speak in that language unashamedly and without awkwardness. They really do. They're only interested in pouring out their lives in service to God. Interestingly enough, these are people who will figure out ways to minister to people dealing with significant scarcity needs. I will say that a number of their projects and ministries proposed to the church get voted down by the people who are dealing with community and identity and are wanting to be very responsible about the church's resources. Not to worry, they figure it out anyway, and every once in a while, they charm the rest of us into taking a risk and doing something good, even if we can't see all the resources. I mean, these are the kinds of people that if you wind up the church year and you have maybe $10,000 left over, and responsible people, the community and identity folks, and great, we're going to add that to the reserve fund. That's what we should do with that. And these folks are saying, no, we're having a hurricane in New York. I call these people out. I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh. Hurricanes are serious business. Or the children are starving to death in Somalia. Let's send it there. And every once in a while, they will charm us into doing that. Now, you might think you want a whole church full of these people. I tell you what, they would make you crazy. They are the ones who want to give away the farm. But as I said, they are the leaven in the lump for the rest of us. And they will get us to take this. Now, what do they need? Stories of lives saved and changed. That's it. And they need to know that resources are handled responsibly, that you do indeed observe generally accepted accounting principles, that money gets counted out to counters, there is responsible handling of those kinds of things, particularly the financial ones in return. So that's giving in the hierarchy. Any questions so far? Yes. No, they do not. You move around because life happens. I'm thinking about people who were laid off in 2008, who might have been moving very comfortably in community identity, even meaning, for whom loss of job plunged them right back into survival.
And those people that are shifting from one category to another, they still sort of fit this rubric or
I mean, they're still experiencing, they still have moved. If you think about this as steps, you'll get hung up on moving up and down. That's not a healthy way to look at it. If you think about it as flat, rather than up and down, they have moved to another, circumstances have moved to another place. And that can be retirement, layoffs, downsizing, health emergencies, health on the part of other members of the family, aging parents, kid goes off to college and you can barely afford it. I mean, there are not all dreadful events, but there are events that kind of will push you to a place you may have been before. And you deal with that. And that's to be expected in life, that we move around. Yes? In different aspects of your life, your health may be fine and your finances are dreadful. Your health and finances may be fine and your spiritual life is the pits. You're not sure if God's mad at you or not. And those will work their way out in different ways. I've here talked just about the financial, about the giving aspect, because it's very visible. Now, let me give you a couple of practical implications here. And if I've messed up on the time, I'll make it up in the next session, I promise. A couple of tips about some things. The first time someone gives you, for whom you have no giving record, but they give you a gift you can track, that generally is a check. It might be electronic, but you know who gave it to you, and it's the first time they've done that. You have to notice that, because when people give you a trackable financial gift, that's their way of saying, hey, I'm giving you this money. It's a desire to kind of let you know, the present. And so what you do is you write a thank you note. Churches are terrible at writing thank you notes. I mean, when people make a financial commitment, you need to send them a letter. Thank you so much for your generous pledge of $1.98 to St. Louis Episcopal Church. Anyway, here's what you send in this letter. Thank you so much for your generous gift of $1.98 to St. Louis Episcopal Church. We appreciate your support of the various ministries of the church. So what we're saying is this is a code. They gave us the money and let us know who gave it so that they would know and say, here I am. We have written a note that says, yeah, we see you. We get it. And so here's the last line of the letter, which is kind of like you're putting the ball back in their court. If you would like for us to establish a giving record for you, please call the church office. We'll be happy to do that. And we all know that establishing a giving record for somebody is no big look. And if they continue to give us money that we can track, we'll start keeping track of it so that when they need a statement for their taxes, we can get it. So it doesn't matter. But if they, A, call and say, yes, I'd like to have a giving record, or B, continue to give you gifts you can track, they are telling you, I'm moving on towards thinking about belonging. So you get in touch with them, get to know them. It's an invitation to get to know them, find out who they are, what they bring, let them know about how they might belong to this congregation. So you need to do that. I drop checks all over the place. I've been doing it for 15 years, and I've gotten one letter thanking me for that. There was somebody who went to the conference on Saturday. And I know why they did it, just to say, yeah, we made it. And I really appreciate it. Second thing, you're going to do a financial commitment program, and to wrap it up, to give everybody a hand in their commitment card, you're going to have a commitment Sunday. And everybody puts all their, if they haven't already turned it in, which they won't have. But they're going to put it in the offering plate, we're going to bring them up front, and somebody is going to bless them. Now, my good friend in Texas, Nick Dyke, says that when people bring those things up in his church, I can't believe he's ever really done this. I think he's shown up. But he said he used to just lift up the offering plate and say, "Dear Lord, after all we say and do, here's what we really think of you." Now, I know that's tempting. Okay, now I will tell you, when you have your commitment Sunday this year, you're going to think about that. You're going to chuckle and everybody's going to wonder what you're laughing about. I always want to do the authentic prayer that says, "Thank you, dear Lord, for the prayerful commitments that we have here in this plate. Now help us pay it." I mean, that's what I love to do. But anyway, so you do that. That's Commitment Sunday. As soon as that service is over, people on the stewardship team pull all the commitment cards out of the offering plate and they take them off to a quiet place. And while they munch on a ham sandwich or something, they compile a list. They take the list of people who have made a commitment the previous year, and they compile the list of those who have made a commitment this year. And then you have list number 3, previous committers who have not yet filled out a card. Now, before dark, you start calling these people. And I can't remember if the script is in here or not, but anyway, there's a script to follow. And basically, you don't leave this message on an answering machine. You wait till you got a live person, and the script kind of goes like this. "Hi, this is Terry. I guess you know I'm working on the church's financial commitment program. We just had a commitment Sunday, and you know what? We noticed your pledge card is missing. You are an important part of the life and work of this congregation, and well, the truth is, we just don't want to do God's work without you. When do you think you could get in the card?" Now comes the hard part. You hush. You do not say another word. Because I'm going to tell you, you can wake me up. Just wait. And you're likely to hear, "Oh, we were out of town and I forgot." Okay, you repeat, "When can you get the card in?" You extract a promise. Hopefully. "Well, when do you need it?" You resist the impulse to say, "Well, we needed it this past Sunday." And you say, "This Sunday, can you?" So you get a promise. You may hear, "I'm not sure what we're going to be able to do. We're running tests and waiting to find out what's wrong with so-and-so. We're not sure." You may unearth a pastoral need of some sort. So your response here is, "Thank you for telling me that. May I tell chief pastoral caregiver in the church, usually the priest?" And they will probably say yes. And so you turn that information in. Sometimes, rarely, they will say no, in which case you don't get to tell. You just get to say there is a pastoral need here. A smart person will take the hint, say maybe I will check and see what it is. And so what you say there is fine. And what I'm going to do is report that this is not, you cannot make a commitment at this time. But we'll do so when you can. Is that okay? Right. Okay. Third possibility is with their response like, "Well, I just don't know if I'm going to give anything this year or not. What were you fools thinking when you did blah, 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 blah." Weirdos on the vestry, and you can unearth a mad. Now this one's tricky. Because what you need to respond is saying, "Thank you so much for telling me that. I'm going to report that you are not making the budget this time. You're still thinking about it. And I will look forward to seeing you Sunday," and you get off the phone. Do not ask for more information. Do not try to talk them out of it, because I'm telling you, if you refuse to enlist in the cause, they're madder than they were when you called. Get off the phone. So that's what you do. What's going on a large percentage of the time is somebody, that community or more likely identity, who just wants to see if anybody noticed. Does anybody notice about who it is? Do I matter? So listen to the script again. We noticed the pledge card was missing. You are an important part of the life and work of this congregation. And if you don't mean the next statement, yes, it is shamelessly manipulative when you say, "The truth is, we don't want to do God's work without you. I have affirmed the fact that we missed them. We care about them. We need them as strongly as I know how." Those are 2 times when what people do here needs a specific kind of response. Next question. Yes?
I'm sorry, this is what
to do with that. There are a lot of people who are working on belonging and have really unhealthy relationships. Is that what you're saying? Yes. And here's what you don't do. You do not go home, take out your congregational mailing list, and decide who fits where. You laugh, but I'm going to tell you, one of the first times I did this with a investor group, I'm not going to put away coffee stuff, and I hear a couple of guys saying, okay, well, let's go get the parish roster and figure out who fits where. And I turned around in horror and said, no, you don't do that. And they're like, well, why not? Well, it turns out they were mad. They said, wait a minute, the two or three guys talking were all regional or national salespeople, and as far as they were concerned, I had given them customer profiles. And you figure out, what their profile is, and you know how to sell to them. And I said, here's why you don't do that. First of all, because you will probably be wrong. You don't necessarily have to know, really, who fits what. You'll have an intuition about it, but you don't need to know specifically. What you need to know is that this is sitting in the congregation Sunday after Sunday, all of it. And so as you conceive messages, you try to conceive messages that will be audible each of these groups. Sometimes it's as simple as, this is an overly simplified example, but let's say you participate in collecting non-perishable food items for a food bank. How do you tell that story and encourage people to support it? First of all, survival folks might be really pleased to know there is one and where it is and who it serves. Safety people want to be very clear what a non-perishable food item is. A poster with photographs from Petco magazines over the bin are really helpful. And it does confuse some of us when, like this month is peanut butter and next month is macaroni and cheese, because I'm always showing up with the wrong thing. So, well, okay, now it's September. Oh, right, peanut butter month is over. So it kind of helps if you remind people about that and give good examples. Community and identity people, the community people love knowing who all else participates, who are we with. The identity people, I think sometimes are thrilled to know how many pounds. I've always wondered who weighs the pounds of stuff we bring, but how many pounds. The meaning and purpose people will be very happy if you tell one story about one family who came to the food pantry, got food, and life was better. That story of the life saved and changed. And if you give people a few scriptural injunctions about all those times where Jesus told us to feed the hungry, it's a good idea too. Actually, Jesus is kind of scary about the people who don't do it. Read Matthew 25. Even as you've done it, I learned this out of King James. Clothe the naked, feed the hungry, visit the sick in prison, even as you've done it unto the least of these, my brethren, you've done it unto me. To the people who didn't do it, he says very plainly, well, to the people who did it, it's like enter into the joy of your master. People over here who didn't do any of this stuff, Jesus said, if you did it not to me, enter into eternal fire. Now, I don't know about you, but I find the clarity of Jesus sometimes a little frightening. So, but that's what you need to do. Just kind of know that it's all out there and be aware of it. That's it. That means you treat people a whole lot differently, except you're not going to ask a brand new person to take on a year-long commitment until you've gotten to know a little bit. You're not going to aggressively pursue a pledge card from every single person. It doesn't work. You are going to follow the people who have already pledged that in the previous year. You're going to figure out what's going on. And you're going to be really clear about the good work you do. Any other questions? So how far off break time now?
I know we're right on time for, I think, maybe a little early for break, but we can have a break.
Oh, let's take it. And when it's time for break, it's time for break. What
time are we supposed to be back? Let's say 15 minutes from now, whatever that is.